Hello and welcome to Life from the Left with me, Omar and Tom Mellors.
Hi.
Hello, Tom. So we're here in Matthew's Yard in Croydon, lovely little cafe, and we're in this little gallery room to start part of a series where we're going to interview progressives who you may be following on social media, but you haven't heard from on camera. And so we're starting with investigative journalist Matt Kennard. Hello, Matt.
Hello, Omar.
Matt has written a couple of books.
Yep.
And have you got another one coming out?
Yeah, there should be one next year. Yeah.
You wrote one called Irregular Army.
That's right.
A few articles, The Guardian, staff writer for the Financial Times, but you're not in that kind of mainstream
Not anymore.
world anymore.
Yeah. Every bridge is burnt. Yeah.
In terms of your writing and in terms of your first book, Irregular Army, tell us a bit about that. So that was essentially uncovering the US military and their recruitment process of recruiting neo-Nazis.
Exactly. So actually, funnily enough, the whole project started in Leeds because I was at uni in Leeds in mid-2000s, and I started working for the student newspaper on the far right, and then got a story about one of the professors who eventually I exposed as a white supremacist sort of BNP supporter. He eventually left the uni. But anyway, after that was a story. At that point, I was kind of a columnist, so I was writing articles against the Iraq War. That's how I really became politicized. But after that, I kind of started to understand the power of investigative journalism, because in a sense, columns are to a penny. They don't really change things in the same way. And the effect I saw with this story with this professor that was eventually left was really intoxicating. I thought, well, if you want to make a positive change, this is an amazing way to do it. So I had that history in the far right, and then I got into Columbia Journalism School in New York, and was kind of looking around at the start for a master's thesis for the journalism course, and I wanted to do it about the far right in the US. And at the time, it was like 2007 that I started, so it was at the height of the war on terror. The surge had just happened, and there was one of the big stories around was the US hasn't got enough troops to populate the occupations of Afghanistan and Iraq. So I sort of thought, well, how can I look into that and kind of look into the far right at the same time? And I thought, well, why not look into how the far right have maybe been enfranchised by the fact they can't recruit enough troops. So I did a bit of preliminary research, and the funny thing about the US is you can call up the Nazi party and stuff because they all have websites. It's not like it's bizarre. So I made calls to all the different white supremacist groups, from the KKK to the Nazi party to National Socialism, and I sort of said to them, I'm just interested in how you found your members have found the US military's recruitment processes since the war on terror started. Have you found that they still kick you out? Is it a problem if you have a swastika on your chest or whatever it is? And pretty much all of them said, no, actually, we have no problems at all now. There's a new regime, we can get in. So at that point, I was like, well, this is a huge story. No one had covered it. And in fact, there was a lot in the media at the time about the shortages and the different things the military were doing to kind of make up that shortfall in troops. So they raised the enlistment age to 40, for example. They raised the body weight standards so fatter people could get in. I mean, it was but they did all that publicly because they wanted to entice people. So I thought, well, I'll look at the white supremacist one because that's obviously one that they didn't publicly advertise. We're now allowing neo-Nazis in. Yeah. So I spent a year doing that and then published that story eventually on Salon, and it did get quite a lot of pickup because no one had written about it, and obviously there's a massive issue with sending neo-Nazis to a country full of brown people armed with like a AR-15 or whatever it is. So at that stage I was contacted by an agent who said, would you like to write a book about this? And I kind of thought about it for a while and eventually realized that it was too specific for one book. So what I did was try to write the story of the whole, every different group that was enfranchised by the war on terror, not just the neo-Nazis. So I looked into all different groups then. So the book eventually came out, and it was covered neo-Nazis, but it also covered gang members, felons, alcoholics, drug users, people with PTSD, all sorts of mental illnesses. So it was a real comment on the US military, but also obviously there's been quite a lot of literature since the dawn of time, really, about how militaries are often a reflection of the society from which they're drawn. So you could see that a lot of these problems that the US military were having mirrored problems that were happening in US society. So more people were having mental illnesses, more people were having drug addictions or alcoholics or whatever it was. And the story came out, or the book came out, and I got an op-ed in the New York Times.
Right.
It was reviewed in the Daily Beast, but didn't really, I mean, the mainstream didn't look at it too much.
Right, I was going to ask, but yeah.
Yeah, I think someone actually said to me recently, if you'd written it differently, if you'd written it in a liberal way, which was a sort of a naive way of saying, this is not, without laying blame, because the book quite specifically says like the brass knew what was happening. Right. If you'd written it in a way that was like, oh, look, these people kind of somehow got in there, then it might have been picked up by the media, but I didn't really hold back on the sort of anti-imperialism, anti-war take, which I think was kind of implicit in the story anyway. And at this stage, as you say, like I guess my CV was quite establishment, because I'd gone from Columbia Journalism School to...
Right. So did you get your FT job through the book or from doing...
No, I actually started working at the FT before I published the book.
Right, okay.
And in fact, that's probably how I probably wouldn't have got the FT if I'd written that book before. But as I said, I got approached by an agent soon after I wrote the article and did this proposal. In the end, he didn't want the proposal, so I kind of put it in a drawer. Right. And then when I was working at the FT, I was doing market reports for 6 months. I wanted to shoot myself in the head. So I was just like, well, I might as well get that proposal out and start actually working on the book, because I'm not doing anything productive in the day. So it kind of happened like that. And then when that book came out, I sort of was kind of pissed off, continued to be pissed off at the FT, because it was completely against my political ideology, morals, whatever it is, and way of thinking about journalism. It wasn't why I got into journalism. So I thought, well, I might as well start collecting information here that I can use when I leave. Yeah. And that became kind of the idea for the second book, which is called The Racket, which was published in 2015. And that's kind of what I did, was use all the material that I got at the FT, but filled in the blanks. So I was doing stories. I went to Haiti and Bolivia and different places for the FT. Wow. But obviously, there's an ideological climate that means you can only write certain things. So I was writing articles that could get into the FT. So, but I kept all the interviews, obviously the transcripts, and then the book's kind of filling in the gaps that I wasn't allowed to use in the FT. And that came out, and that was reviewed in The Guardian, but it was a proper hatchet job. It was hilarious.
So tell us about the Racket then. What was that focusing?
So the Racket, it's kind of a global investigation on the ground. So there's obviously a lot of academic work on how economic imperialism works, but I found that there wasn't a lot of investigative journalism that kind of looked at the mechanisms that were being used by Western countries primarily, but also obviously other superpowers. But what agencies, what different mechanisms were being used, and I basically had amazing access at the FT. So, for example, I went to Bolivia and was able to interview the US ambassador and the head of the USAID and National Endowment for Democracy, and all these kind of agencies that when they meet an FT journalist, they're actually extremely open because they think you're one of them, obviously. So you're sitting there, you're like, oh, all right. So I got a ton of good information that I could use, and what I did was try and understand how, I guess it's liberal imperialism because it's all done in the name of democracy and human rights, but how the reality of what happens when you kind of go up against this liberal imperialism. And Bolivia is a good example because in Bolivia, all these agencies had worked there for decades. And then whenever Morales came into power, there was a massive kind of battle between them and the Morales administration. And eventually USAID and National Endowment for Democracy were kicked out of Bolivia. And Bolivia was a really interesting case for me because I think, and it's the same in the UK, but now with Corbyn, but I don't think you can really understand how systems work until you get someone who makes the system not work, if you see what I mean. Because you can see all the pressure points. Yeah, exactly. And in Bolivia, Evo Morales disrupted it massively, so you could see the pressure points that all these, and all the different mechanisms that these agencies were using were sort of exposed in a way. So yeah, so I went to Haiti, Bolivia, Turkey, Tunisia, Egypt, all these different places. Yeah, just tried to write a sort of investigative journalism from the ground up view of how the global economy works. It was very ambitious. I mean, I don't know if it completely landed everything it needed to land, but I kind of took it as I had a lot of material to work with because I had all these different places that I'd been to. But again, it didn't make much of it was completely ignored, which is a clever way to make something not go anywhere. Because if the review that happened in The Guardian, although it was really bad, and it compared it to the Protocols of the Elders of Zion in the first sentence. It was quite funny. It's not funny, but it was quite funny. It was just so brazen. But that actually got quite a lot. Even though it was bad, it was quite good for the book because there was a lot of anger about it and stuff. Whereas I had a friend at the FT who said that they heard two people talking about it. One of the young ones on this blog called Alphaville was like, "Oh, it's a load of shit. We should write a awful review." Yeah. Or like cane it in some review, and the older guy was just like, no, you don't want to do it. You just ignore it. It will go away. I mean, it will go nowhere. And essentially, I think that's the best tactic.
Didn't you get like top student Guardian or something?
Oh yeah, I got the
before that, and then the Guardian give you a.
Yeah, no. Well, to be honest, and it's just I don't want to. This sounds a bit arrogant, but it shouldn't. I just don't think the guy really understood the issues. Obviously, any author who gets a bad review, but if you read it, he got things mixed up. He didn't quite get it. Like a lot of it was actually, it wasn't. I mean, I think criticism's good if it lands, but a lot of what he was writing, I was just like, actually, man, you don't actually understand what you're talking about.
So, is there a bit of like the liberal lens finds it hard to understand that there are sort of mechanisms in place? And when you describe them, it sounds conspiratorial.
Exactly.
Actually, that's just how global economy works.
Exactly.
That's how imperialism works. But because I've had this issue when I've spoken to friends, and they're like, well, it sounds like Naomi Klein, her diagnosis sometimes it just sounds a bit conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
Yeah, they'll say something like that. And I think it is that they see these institutions and these elected officials, and they think, this is how the world works.
Yep.
But they don't realise or don't care to realise these mechanisms behind it. And
exactly.
I think that's a bit of it. Like when comparing it to the protocols of...
Yeah, I think that the conspiracy theory thing is a very clever way of policing the discourse. And it does put people off because no one wants to be called a conspiracy theorist. So if you constantly can marginalise people that have a systematic view of how the world works, then it's a very good thing. And it also makes me laugh because you read in the papers all the time, especially the right-wing media, about how the unions want this for their members and they're going on strike and they're like the teachers' union wants better wages for the teachers. Okay, well, I accept that. Yes, that's their job. Yeah. Why is it different with the 1%? Why do we suddenly think the 1% don't have this consciousness about how they can maximise their interests and their money? I mean, and it's not even that comparison is not accurate because the 1% have much more of a scheme to keep the world working in their interest
and avoid such taxes.
Exactly.
A teacher can't get round.
Exactly.
Right, such accountants.
But yet we have this society, we have this media and this discourse where one is an organised class involved in class warfare against the elite. And the other one, they don't have any class consciousness at all. They're just sort of an amorphous set of people that they don't, when in fact it's the opposite. They're the ones that are really fucking organised and have been for years, well, forever. So I think it's just a clever way of policing it. I also think, as you say, that liberals are a bit lost when they start trying to systematically analyse things, because a lot of them benefit from the systems that they have to analyse. So it's kind of hard for them to kind of have in their head that they're the beneficiaries of a system which is fundamentally unjust and is depriving billions of people of enough food to eat or whatever it is. You know what I mean? So it's quite nice to think that you live in a society where all the institutions are doing nice things. And this whole, it's just the ideologies that are built on top of these mechanisms that I talked about are so potent and so well developed that it's very hard to puncture them. And that's what we one of the investigations that we did for a long time recently, and is in this third book that should be coming out next year, is about this system called the investor state dispute settlement system,
right, yeah.
which is how corporations sue states.
Yeah.
It's got that posh name. Go on, sorry.
Right, yeah. So that third book's going to be called?
It's up in the air at the moment, but it should be Stealing the World.
Right.
But it's about corporate control, and ISDS, that system I'm talking about, whereby corporations sue states, is one of those mechanisms where even the ideology doesn't really make sense that they built up on top of it. Like if you talk to people, they're like, oh, it makes sense because corporations they'll only go to countries where they can ensure that they won't be taken over by the government, so we need to give them that insurance system where they can go to arbitrators. But you're like, well, if you go to the Congo and make loads of money, part of the reason you're making loads of money is because you take the risk. It's risk-free capitalism, basically.
Is it Philip Morris, the tobacco company, suing Australia?
Totally,
I don't know what's happened with that, or that's been settled, but they sued Australia because of the banning plain packaging.
Exactly. And Veolia in Egypt suing Egypt for raising the minimum wage. I mean, it's mad, and it's the regulatory chill that it's such a barbarous system, like, because the regulatory chill is they have these massive law firms which send letters to governments that are planning progressive legislation, saying if you do X, Y, Z, we're going to take you to arbitration. And arbitration itself is very, it's a kangaroo court effectively. You don't have to have any qualification to be an arbitrator. Right. A lot of them are seen at this place called ICSID, which is like the fourth branch of the World Bank that no one knows about. But they hand over billions of dollars to corporations from some of the poorest countries in the world. But anyway, that's a whole different conversation. But that system is really interesting because it's one of the few that I've come across that even the ideology that supports it, the liberal capitalist ideology that supports it, doesn't even make sense. So you talk to arbitrators and people involved in the system, they find it hard to even defend it because it's so nakedly about just taking money from poor countries to give to rich corporations. So a lot of the work that I have done and want to do is about trying to puncture those layers of ideology that are built up on these systems.
Yeah. Sort of in terms of getting your sort of journalism more out there, because certain media outlets like The Guardian aren't really doing their job. What do you think of the future for alternative media that's kind of tried to sprout with Canary, Evolve? Yeah. They're kind of struggling with their models of sustaining themselves at the moment. I think that seems to be the main thing for them. But do you think they can eventually sort of do the jobs of media outlets like The Guardian? And what do you think for the future of those kind of?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question, and there's a couple of different trends. One is that there's a massive democratization of the media, which is undoubtedly a good thing, and has in some ways been underpinned the success of Corbyn and Bernie Sanders in the States. You could argue that they couldn't have happened without social media and stuff, because it massively takes the power away from the mainstream media, which has traditionally controlled the narrative in a very, very strong way. So that's really good. I think that it's difficult because what the mainstream now does is controls the narrative by destroying the reputations of outlets which publish alternative information or information which isn't. So Canary and Evolve, they do publish really good work, some really good work, some not so good work, but their reputations have been, there's been such, unbelievable amounts of attacks on them. And I mean, if they get one fact wrong, everyone's on it. Whereas The Guardian can publish a completely fake story about Paul Manafort going to the Ecuadorian embassy 3 times. It's still up on their website. And it's kind of not even a big deal. No one talks about it. If the Canary had done that, they would have been shut down. So I think that the mainstream have kind of retained some control by destroying the reputations of alternative media. But I don't think that will last, and one of the things we want to do, and we're looking into, is creating platforms that kind of sit in between.
When you say we...
well, I can't say too much at the moment, but we want to get involved. Me and a couple other people want to get involved in the alternative media scene,
Right. Okay.
and I think that you've kind of put your finger on what the problem is that I think that the Guardian has the reputation, Canary doesn't, but the Guardian won't publish information which is that critical of any institution that it should be. So what you need a platform that's highly respected, rigorous, does really quality investigations, but doesn't have a reputation that's destroyed, or doesn't have a reputation that can be easily, the information on it can be easily dismissed.
Yeah.
So I think that's the next battle, that the quality has to reflect, has to be super high. Unfortunately, but when you're up against, the mainstream don't have any of those problems, but when you're up against a whole edifice, a whole media system which is out to destroy you, you can't make any mistakes, So.
Yeah.
So I'm hopeful. I mean, in terms of the long term, I think it's amazing. And I mean, you look at it now. It's like we were saying before we put the camera on. Like, if you listen to any media now, you go on Twitter afterwards, and everyone's literally all these idiots, all these suits that spout pieties and all the rubbish that you hear. They've been completely they've been picked apart by everyone within 5 minutes, and that's an amazing thing that I think is really powerful. So places like Twitter and stuff do enfranchise a lot of people that were previously outside of the media.
Yeah. You want to ask something about Corbyn and?
Yeah, I mean, going back to your work on the racket and imperialism and this kind of system. I mean, one thing that struck me in your interview with Jeremy Corbyn last year was a line towards the end, actually, of the interview, and he says he describes powerful forces that move around the world that want to oppose those who bring about economic and social justice. And when we look at Corbyn in the UK, we often think of him domestically and his domestic policies, and for people on the left and progressives, they're brilliant, but they would completely upturn the economic and social order that's been around, in the UK for the last 30-40 years, neoliberalism. But we don't always think about his impact on the world stage. So thinking about those powerful forces, what do you think? What are those powerful forces, and how would they respond to Corbyn as PM?
Yeah, that's a good question, and one I guess that they're all gaming out. But I think he's a huge threat to the establishment that's controlled this country for hundreds, if not 1,000. Like, the aristocracy here is embedded because we never had a revolution which completely upturned the social system. So they've been there for a long time. And there's obviously been anti-imperialist socialist leaders that have been headed movements which have been powerful and threatened to bring down governments, etc., etc. But in terms of someone who's taken a parliamentary route to power, no one is going to step on as many toes as Jeremy Corbyn will if he becomes PM. So you literally across the board are going to have attacks from every single interest. He's going to, even the civil service, the military, every single institution, which is bananas, because I don't know how you even deal with that. Because hegemony is about actually having ideological control over those institutions, I guess, and he's never going to have that. Everyone's going to hate him from top to bottom. If you think that the civil service is going to be to the right of the Parliamentary Labour Party, and the Parliamentary Labour Party hate him enough already. So he's got he's going to have many different interests. I think that what's hopeful is that he has a movement on the ground that isn't going away. And I think, I know people saying he wasn't the guy, it should have been someone else, but in some ways he is the only one that could have done it, because if you think he's the intelligence agencies, every single journalist in the mainstream paper would have been going through every part of his life for the last, since they had records on it, and they haven't found much.
Well, they've gone through everything, and he's seen off two prime ministers.
Exactly.
And he can see off another one.
Exactly.
Hopefully in the next kind of.
But as I was saying before, I think that there's different very sort of prominent interests that you can look at that would be that he's very unique. One is Israel. because we've never had a leader of a mainstream political party who's had a pro-Palestinian history like he has. And the anti-Semitism crisis, I'm not saying it's been directed by the Israeli embassy or whatever, but there are reasons that has really taken hold as an issue with Corbyn, because they tried many different smears. You'll remember, like Jess Phillips was talking about him being a misogynist, and I don't know if you remember his first cabinet, because he appointed MacDonald, the Shadow Chancellor. They said that he didn't like women, and then they said he was a Czech agent. I mean, it's literally on and on and on. And they tried it, and they all kind of went away, but the anti-Semitism one has stuck. And that's mainly because of his history of pro-Palestinian activism and the threat he poses. I mean, obviously it's been used opportunistically by his enemies as well. But I think that he poses a massive threat to Israel, number one. Not their existence, but a massive threat to them being able to do whatever they want. And then number two, Saudi Arabia. There's been no other mainstream political party leader who's said that they will stop arms to Saudi Arabia. And the establishment in this country, the royal family in Saudi Arabia, are literally entwined completely, economically, politically, diplomatically. The Al Yamamah arms deal, which is the biggest British arms deal ever, which began in 1985, billions and billions of pounds, is threatened by Jeremy Corbyn. And that is a huge foundation stone of the British state and the Saudi relationship with the Saudis and the whole Middle East that is threatened by him. So there all sorts of all those interests are going to be working to try and oust him. It's not going to be public, and this is the problem. To go back to conspiracy theories, you can talk about it in a sort of general sense, but we haven't got information because we don't have access to the embassy recordings or whatever it is. But there, of course, interests that are being threatened by a Corbyn premiership will be working to oust him. The conspiracy theory is that they're all just sitting around going, oh, it's all right that we got a guy that's going to stop selling weapons to us or is going to vote for Palestine. Do you know what I mean? That of course they will be working on how to oust him. So, there's two examples, but it just goes on and on. Hedge fund. I mean, every element of the British state and the private sector is threatened by him. I mean,
well, they haven't said that. I saw the Financial Times saying the city are warming.
That's because they're so scared of no deal, right?
Yeah. So it's mainly to do with. Yeah, that's to do with Brexit.
Yeah, I actually think that the way that that's been presented is quite interesting because he's kind of being used now by the establishment which wants to remain, and I think that it will weaken him in a way that's kind of hard to divine now, but I think it will weaken him maybe in the long term because his whole thing has always been and this is the world we live in, is that insurrectionary forces. People hate the establishment or the status quo now, and if you can position yourself against the status quo, you have, look at Trump, Bolsonaro, all these people that wouldn't have got into power in a different time. They're all lying, they're part of the establishment. Yeah. But Corbyn, 2017, he managed to position himself against it, and I think with the Brexit thing, he's been pushed the public perceive him. I mean, obviously this is massively debatable. Everyone has different perspectives, but
I think that whole Brexit thing. I think and sort of pleasing the city and not. I think he's got to pick fights with certain people at the moment, and I think things like that, stuff like Trident. Something like he's kind of not being, saying what he really wants to say because. I think it's good to be principled, whatever, but I think on certain kind of issues, you've got to get into power to then really become radical. And I don't think that's selling out. I think essentially this whole programme is radical. But on certain things we go, I wish you would be more on this or that. I just think...
But this is definitely a debate that needs to be had on the left. Yeah. But because I know I've read that Paul Mason article years back where he was basically saying with Syriza, in Greece, they kind of went with that idea that if you're going up against the Greek state and the Greek deep state as well, you have to pick your battles. You can't just go in and go. But look what happened with them. They capitulated on everything in the end. And I sort of feel like with him, strategically, he's got to be like all or none at all because he's going to be. They can pick him off eventually. I mean, I'm not saying you're wrong. It's obviously it's a debate.
No.
We've never had this, so we don't know what's going to happen.
I think the key difference is that we're not part of the Eurozone, and I think Greece was so dependent on the EU. We're not so dependent on such institutions like that at the moment. I think as long as you can get into power, you can change laws. You have a lot of power once you get in, and you can make those necessary changes that you want to see. But fundamentally, we need to get him in because I trust him to.
But what kind of compromises need to be made then? Trident. I mean, he makes the point with Trident that it was a members' vote, right?
Yeah.
So that's fair enough. He's accepted party democracy.
Yeah.
I don't think Trident should be renewed, but fair enough.
Yeah.
But where else has he compromised? I mean, I don't think you should compromise on cutting arms to Saudi Arabia.
Oh no.
Or recognising Palestine, or.
Oh no. Yeah.
But I think that part of the left do want that, because everyone talks about Corbynism without Corbyn, and for me that means Corbynism without anti-imperialism, because that's the real thing. As you were talking about earlier, like his impact in the world isn't talked about much, and I think that's because it's a bit embarrassing for the mainstream left, because domestic policy is fine, like it's not super radical. It's a national education service, like good things, more money for the NHS, stop privatisation, etc., etc. It's not really radical. His anti-imperialism is the real thing that is really different to not even just the rest of the political class. Even within his own shadow cabinet, he's the only one that has that history internationally with the internationalist left, and Chile solidarity and Palestine and all these. McDonnell, I guess, to a degree, but not really in the same way. So I think that in some ways everyone just wants to kind of just be like, look, forget that stuff, let's just get into power and do the domestic stuff, which I'm sympathetic to. I understand that position, but I sort of feel also like this is such a historic opportunity that
we just need to see Corbyn and Bernie Sanders hug.
Exactly.
On a world stage.
Yeah.
I know.
There's a point to which, we were talking about it when the cameras were off, but this is a Labour Party which up until now has been described as shambolic, but then we've got a Prime Minister who literally wants to shut down Parliament for the first time maybe since the Civil War, 400 years ago. So actually, this is a good time to be bold.
Yeah,
right?
I agree.
Because you've got a lunatic and a party which is verging on making the Republican Party look sane.
Exactly.
which is amazing. So
well, and actually that's a good point, because if you look at the US, look at Trump. He's completely anarchic. He just full goes for it, and people kind of like that. Of course, he's a fascist, and the policies themselves are horrendous. But the style of populism, I would like to see Corbyn do more left populism. I think there's been too much, and a lot of people have argued that you need to play the mainstream media, you need to do X, Y, Z. If I was his advisor, I'd just say, look, they're never going to like you. They're going to just try and destroy you. As they proved over and over again. Go around them, speak in populist terms, pick battles with powerful interests, show people that you're different. Even Boris does it. I mean, he's a complete charlatan, and it's not true, but he frames it all about where it's the people against Parliament, against the establishment. Corbyn is actually genuinely anti-establishment and genuinely wants to upend inequality and whatever. So why not just be bold and fucking go for it? And just, for example, we talked about The Guardian before the cameras were. Why not call out The Guardian publicly? I mean, they've spent the last 4 years trying to destroy him, and he still posts their stories the whole time. I'm like, why not just? I mean, if Trump does that, he's done that with the New York Times and stuff. Why not just declare war on these established interests that hate you because of your policies, not because of any other reason? I'm just putting the question out there. I'm not saying I'm right.
I mean, that's a great question to debate, isn't it? That really is.
Yeah. I'm not sure I'm completely convinced, but
no.
Something to.
I mean, I'm not completely convinced. I mean, it's a big.
Maybe not quite as brave. Yeah, well, wouldn't be as quite as brave as he. Maybe I think that will. As I say, come after the election. But.
He has been good at being critical of the media, and I think it's been good that he has defended himself in that respect. I know what you mean. He hasn't really called them out directly. The Guardian say, because I think we often talk about the Guardian because when you're sort of on the left in the UK,
that's your kind of go-to. You think it should be
exactly.
Labour.
Yeah.
Sort of nowadays, just routinely disappointed in the way they angle stories.
Yeah.
Apart from there are a few. columnists, Gary Young, and
Aditya Chakrabarti, Owen Jones, and
but the whole, sorry, it's kind of going for a little bit, but
Dawn Foster, who was basically, she was sacked after the Tom Watson piece, basically saying that he should resign. I mean, what kind of message does that say? If you're against the editorial line, we don't want you on our books, basically.
I think, but that's a good point. I mean, like, why are we even, as on the left, entertaining them? They prove time and time and again that they've tried more than any other paper, maybe. Well, no, that's maybe not true. They've all tried. But as you say, you would expect The Guardian not to be the same, but they've been on the same page as all the other papers that are...
And it's, Corbyn's been in leader, Labour leader for sort of 4 years.
I know.
Still haven't got the message.
Yeah, but and the other reason I think that the left don't speak, that there's not much talk about it. I mean, there is on the sort of fringe of the left, but the mainstream is because everyone wants to write for them. That's it. Like, I mean, last article I wrote for them, I don't know what we are, 2 years ago. I'll never be able to write for them again, I imagine, just because I sound off the whole time about how bad I think their coverage of Corbyn and other subjects is. But I kind of accepted that, but I think a lot of people, that is where they want to publish, so they don't. So it's a feedback loop, so they never get the critique that they need to in this mainstream that will make them maybe change their ways.
Yeah. And they'll be constantly backed up by other journalists in the Times and Telegraph, and don't be bullying. It's seen as bullying.
Exactly.
If you're critical.
Totally.
Stop trolling me. Well, you look down the feed. It's like people just being critical.
I know.
Yeah.
And that's another way. These are all mechanisms of controlling the narrative, right? And if you make people who don't have a platform afraid to criticise mainstream journalists by calling them trolls or calling them abusive when they're not, then it works, because people don't want to be seen as like a crank. You know what I mean? But
I've had a Huffington Post journalist message me a direct message, basically threatening me that he was going to block me because I was critical of a certain kind of tweet.
It's mad.
In mainstream journalism now, isn't it? I think it seems that they're almost like they're beyond reproach in many ways, especially the institutions.
Totally.
The institutions and journalists a little bit. And I think, it's obviously very established, that idea. But maybe with your sort of idea for this emerging outlet, which would be very rigorous, would have a more left-wing approach in terms of reporting, but have that kind of quality that maybe the more, you took the Canary and stuff, just haven't been able to, because probably largely because of resourcing, I imagine. Maybe that could fill that gap.
I have to say, I wouldn't call it a left wing. See, this is an interesting thing with the journalism. I think that I personally like to stay away from left, right wing on journalism. I like to say adversarial. For example, I don't care if a journalist is left wing or right wing if they have an attitude towards power which is adversarial. I think that's the important thing. And if we will start this publication, if Corbyn got into power and his government was doing bad things abroad, we wouldn't not cover it. We'd be like, we see journalism's role, or I see journalism's role as taking on the powers that be. And that's kind of maybe a problem, not a problem, but because there's a place for both. But with the Canary and Evolve, they are left-wing, they're campaigning, which you need that. I mean, they form, and Squawk Box as well, they form a very important function. But what I want to do, what we want to do is not that. We want to just have and the Guardian used to do it. You see pockets of it. I mean, Snowden, for example, they had my politics are very different to Alan Rushbridger, but essentially he took on GCHQ and the NSA and withstood intense pressure to publish those revelations. Now, that's what I see a journalist's role as, left wing and right wing, whatever it is. I think that the Guardian's completely lost that, though. I mean, they especially with the security services and the military, if you look at since the Snowden affair, how they're reporting of the MOD, MI5, MI6 has progressed. It's just become completely either non-existent, and when it is, it's just completely mollycoddles. They get exclusive interviews with the head of MI6, and they sort of ask him if James Bond, if Daniel Craig would get into MI6 and stuff like that. That's one I was reading the other day. Like, just really softball question. Yeah, exactly. But you're just like, come on, man. But I think that that's the problem with the UK, especially, is that we're an important country. We're the second largest arms dealer. We're the financial capital of the world in London. We have companies like BP, HSBC based here, which have massive global imprints, and yet no one's covering that kind of stuff. And it's a massive, massive hole.
Apart from Mr. Ethical.
Mr. Ethical, yeah, he's cool. I've never met him, but yeah, he's cool. Yeah, he is, yeah. But yeah, the media. I think that there's in the long term, it's very. I'm optimistic about the media because we're very much at the start of all this stuff.
Yeah, we're at the start of social media, really. At its birth and what it can. Absolutely.
But it's quite interesting, like to go back to what you said about the mainstream reaction to. They hate it. Like, there's always these stories in like Guardian about how social media has ruined everything and like it's open. And obviously there are dark elements of social media. There's no doubt about it. Yeah. But I think part of it is that they've always had this sort of cloistered existence where they live above everyone else and they can tell people what to think. We'll write an 800-word column to tell you paupers what to think. And now everyone's like, nah, shut up. That's not right. And whether I don't think they're conscious of this, but somewhere they're pissed off, and that's probably why they react in such a thin-skinned way. Yeah. Because I think underneath all the arrogance that you see amongst these sort of liberal and right-wing elite journalists, part of the arrogance is an insecurity because they know that essentially what they do is have opinions for a living. Like the rest of us do it and we don't get paid, do you know what I mean? So I think somewhere in their soul they're aware of that. So when they get questioned, they're like, oh, blah, blah, blah. But,
yeah, it's fascinating. He's time I'm just worried, like, time to go on.
Well, yeah, I mean, I always thought we could maybe talk about what's sort of happening this week.
You're right, yeah.
Thinking maybe,
Brexit.
Yeah, well, let's not go too much into Brexit, but maybe the kind of, how you think it might play out now in terms of they've just voted through, well, it should get voted through tonight, the blocking no deal Brexit, and then Boris tabling basically a motion to trigger a general election. I think Labour are going to say no. When would be the right time to say yes? And if they did, once there is a general election, what do you think of Labour's chances? What are the dangers? What would your advice be for Jeremy Corbyn, sort of tactics-wise?
I think I've thought about this a lot.
Yeah.
And obviously everyone has a different opinion on it, so there's no, and it changes day to day because I mean, well, I was very much against second referendum, and I've come now round to it a little bit.
Yeah.
But I feel so. In short, what I feel he should do is he said second referendum with Remain, right? So he's got all these Remainers on board, essentially, in theory.
Yeah.
But if he comes out and campaigns for Remain, he will lose every single lever because there's no progressive way. There's quite a few different progressive options if you want to Remain. There's Lib Dems, Greens, but if you want Brexit, there's no progressive option. It's Brexit Party or Tory. So I think he should say Labour's going to be neutral, shadow cabinet MPs, or it would be the cabinet, but they can campaign either way. Me personally, I'm going to negotiate a deal with the EU, which he said. Yeah. I will campaign for my deal. I expect I'll be able to get a good deal. And then I didn't vote for Brexit, but sort of ideologically I was pro-Brexit in the sense that I think the EU is a neoliberal institution that is a playground for corporations and private capital. But I would feel I think that he would get a lot of people if he said, because everyone's like, everyone's always saying, oh, Lexit, it's this bullshit, it's not going to happen. It's like, well, we're actually quite close. If there is a general election and he wins, that will be Lexit, because it will be a Jeremy Corbyn or a negotiated exit from the EU. You can take all the good stuff, leave all the bad, sweet. So I don't know, what do you guys think?
Well,
do you think he should campaign for his own deal? Because the other thing is, how can you not? Can you negotiate a deal and then say, I'm going to campaign against my own deal? Is that even possible?
But then do you have three campaigns? No deal, Corbyn's deal, Remain, and isn't it better to be one? It's going to be one or the other, rather than being sort of in between. I think the problem with the discourse now, it's gone so extreme. Leaving the EU has to be no deal to a lot of Brexiteers. So unless you're going to back that, I don't think Corbyn Corbyn won't. So I don't. For me, I think he should maybe commit to the whole Remain side. To be honest, I think he's got to commit to one or the other, because I think we've seen that
the general election.
The halfway house, it's really scuppered him, and I know it's the best thing to do, the most principled thing to do. We need to compromise. We need to compromise. That's the most sensible approach. Was a compromise. But I think we've reached this point where you're either in the no deal or I'm going to give you a referendum, but we think that the best deal is remaining and reforming. But then I do go back to no, it should be.
It would be an interesting situation where you've negotiated a deal and then you say, we've negotiated this deal, but actually we think you should vote.
I don't think it's tenable.
I know what you mean, but it would be.
But the other interesting thing, which no one's talking about, is in this second referendum, I doubt that Labour and anyone will want to put no deal on it. And then I don't think that's going to have any legitimacy. I mean, I wouldn't want to put no deal on it because I think it's a freaking disaster. But how is it going to have? If you make it Corbyn's deal or Remain, you disenfranchise millions of people who are like, well, don't want Corbyn's deal, but I definitely want to leave. So everyone will be like, this doesn't have any legitimacy. But they haven't. The problem is that it's necessarily ambiguous now, his position, but in a general election campaign, it will be like analysed. They're going to have to come out in a really clear way about what it is, because they can't be ambiguous.
They can't
I think he should say, I'm going to campaign for my deal, but Labour will be neutral. And then you get. I don't actually agree with you that obviously some leavers want no deal, but I think some would be like, okay, if we're going to leave with a Corbyn, a negotiated one, we might do it.
You think it's been a bit over-egged, do you think the ones that are like really pro no deal, which is very vocal, like the ERG and
Well, I don't know. It's quite scary that the Brexit Party, whose platform was no deal, won 33% in the European election and came top. So
I do think it would
that
be
would
good
support Omar's point.
If the Tories cannot deliver Brexit by the 31st, I think that's good news for Labour in terms of in a general election after that date we haven't left. The Brexit Party are not going to be campaigning with the Tories because they've been let down. You said we were going to leave on the 31st, and so I think
it depends why they don't leave though. If it's because Parliament's hamstrung them, then they can just say, well, we'll leave.
But what would be the point of the Brexit Party standing anywhere then? I don't, because they will. The only party that'll take votes off are the Conservatives. I don't.
Apparently, there's a potential coalition between them two. Like they said that we won't stand candidates against the Conservatives if they come out with a no-deal position. And Boris he's a complete chancer. He would do that if he thought that was the difference between him not winning and winning an election. So.
Okay. So what's your prediction? We have a general election, Tom.
Yeah.
I want you to give me a prediction.
Prediction what? How it's going to end up?
In terms of who's going to win, is it going to be an overall majority? Give me some numbers.
I mean, I am perhaps stupidly optimistic that Labour might actually be able to get a majority.
An outright majority.
I think it'd be really.
What happened to Joe Swinson?
I think it'd be really thin it'd be a really thin majority. It'd be sort of like maybe.
You think that those that are voting Lib Dem at the moment are going to come round to because Labour have come round on?
I think it can happen. Labour's taken a knock over the past couple of years in the polls, but we know that in election time, news coverage is different.
Media sort of equal.
Corbyn does well, and what Corbyn does really well at is bringing out the other issues that everyone's not talking about because everyone's so obsessed with Brexit, but are really important. The climate emergency, inequality, austerity, that kind of stuff that people care about, but because our news feeds are full of Brexit, we're like, oh, Brexit is really important. We need to get it sorted to move on as a country. But I think Corbyn's really good at doing that, and that's where he could bring in people. But it's a thought.
Yeah. And if there was one policy you'd like him to commit to that he hasn't, is there anything you can think of that would do for you? I know, I'm
briefing
pretty
on this before this interview. I'm like, thanks. I mean, at the moment,
Or the most important one,
well,
feelings
because
to
I'm
fulfill.
because I'm probably because I'm reading a lot about the climate emergency and climate change at the moment. I think anything on that. He's already brought out a lot of good stuff.
Yeah.
But I think the more radical, the better about decarbonising the economy and targeting corporations which are carbon intensive. I mean, most carbon in the world is emitted by something like 100 corporations, I think, the majority of carbon.
Okay.
You know, you mentioned the UK being the financial centre of the world. We're in a unique position to be able to penalise these people, you know, on behalf of the planet. And Corbyn in power, a Labour Party who's like-minded, you know, in that way, could actually do something. So
Definitely.
I would like to see action on that.
Okay. And what about you? Predictions, numbers, sort of. Overall majority?
I don't know. To be honest with you, I think it all depends on the position that he comes out of. I'm kind of pessimistic that if he doesn't cover my position. No, if he doesn't throw some bone to Leavers, I think that it could be really bad. I personally, because I just think that I think one of the things that's warping our perception now is, trust me, I get optimistic when on a day like today when PMQs is just all over Boris, but I think that now he has the establishment and the media are on his side. And PLP. Yeah. So there's a perception that it's the opposite of 2017, where everyone was against him. So it felt like he was going to do nothing, and then the country outside was different. And I think now we have this feeling that But I think there's a lot of people that are pissed off about Brexit that we just can't see.
A bit cocoon because we see happy MPs, maybe not a happy sort of population.
Exactly, and I think that they're not stupid. The Tories, they know they're putting out messaging to the population. Yeah. The whole suspending Parliament was saying we're serious about getting Brexit through. Yeah. So I think that if he came out with some fudge where he could legitimately say that I'll negotiate, I expect a good deal and I'll negotiate it, but I'll allow a free vote and everyone can campaign for whoever they want. Yeah. Then I think that he could definitely get a majority. Then again, he might get a majority even without that. Who knows? Because as you say, he's
unpredictable times.
Yeah.
And if there was one policy that you want to fulfil or something new,
put Tony Blair at The Hague, and the rest of it, and Alistair Campbell too, and Jeff Hoon. Get them all, just line them up and send them over there. Yeah, handcuff them.
Okay. Well, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
It's been very informative, cool. And we'll see you guys on the next episode of Life on the Left. See you then.
Thanks.